we're going to find the greatest common factor of polynomials. So we're going to factor each polynomial by finding its greatest common factor. So we're going to look at the two terms here that are added together. We're going to start with the most basic way of looking at it, and then I'll show you an easier way to look at it. So if we break 5x cubed down, so 5x cubed is just 5 times x times x times x. So you can just break each of the terms down. 10 we know breaks down to 2 times 5. So 10x breaks down to 2 times 5 times x. So then we can look at the greatest common factor. So in this case, once we broke the terms down to their factors or prime factors, each one has a 5 and each one has an x. So that means because the greatest common factor is 5x, I'm going to factor that out. That's what they have in common with each other, so we can factor it out. Okay. So what's left inside, or what's left over here, is what we have inside the parentheses. So this is like the opposite of the distributive property. With the distributive property, you start with something on the outside and you multiply it by everything inside. Now we're starting with the answer and we're going to see, well, what can we factor out? What can we move out to the outside? And well, what will be left inside? So inside we're going to have a term plus another term. So there's going to be addition and there's going to be two terms here. So if we remultiply, we will get 5x cubed plus 10x. So I'm just going to look at, for 5x cubed, when I factored out 5x, I'm left with x times x, which is x squared. In 10x, when I factored out 5x, I'm left with 2. So that means by factoring out the greatest common factor, I have 5x times x squared plus 2. If I remultiply this, 5x times x squared is 5x cubed, plus 5x times 2 is 10x. Okay, so that's one way of looking at it. Or you can say, well, what do they have in common? 5 and 10, well, I know I can divide them both by 5, so I factored that out. I have x cubed and x. Well, each one of them has at least one x, so I factored out the x. Then you can say, if I have 5x cubed and I divide it by 5x, well, what's left over? Well, if I took one of the x's away, I'm left with just x squared. Plus 10x divided by 5x. Well, 10 divided by 5 is 2, and x divided by x is 1. So I'm left with just 2, because 2 times 1 is 2. So if it's easier to find the greatest common factor and see what's left over, to leave inside the parentheses, do it that way. If you can do it in your head by saying, what can I factor out? And then divide each term by that, go ahead and do it that way. So I'm going to show the most basic way each time so you can get the hang of doing that in case the other way kind of confuses you. All right, so I'm just going to find the greatest common factor of each. So 25 breaks down to 5 times 5. 30 breaks down to 2 times 15, which is 3 times 5. So I'm going to find the greatest common factor. 25x to the 4th y is 5 times 5 times x times x times x times x times y. All right, and we have 30xy squared is 2 times 3 times 5 times x times y times y. So find their greatest common factor. They each have a 5, they each have an x, and they each have a y. So that means my greatest common factor is 5xy. So that's what I'm going to factor out. So remember, reverse of the distributive property. We have a 5xy. we're going to multiply it by what's left over. So this first term, I have 5 times x times x times x, which is just 5x cubed. Okay, I have to bring down the plus that's in between. Right, so 30xy squared, I'm left with 2 times 3 times y. So 2 times 3 is 6, and 6 times y is 6y. So that's what I'm left with after I factor out my greatest common factor. If I re-multiply, I will end up back with my original problem. Okay, so let's try another one. So this one has a few more variables. This one has x, y, and z involved. So I'm going to start by breaking down negative 24 is negative 1 times 24. 24 is 2 times 12. 12, 2 times 6. 6 gives me 2 times 3. Okay, I'm going to break down negative 40. Remember, I can change minus 40x squared to plus negative 40x squared. So I'm just going to break that down because, well, here I know I'm factoring out a negative 1, so I can also factor out a negative 1 here if I treat this as negative 40. So negative 1 times 40. 40 gives me 2 times 20. 20 is 2 times 10. And 10 is 2 times 5. All right, so that means negative 24 x, y, z squared is equal to negative 1 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 3 multiplied by x times y times z times z. So when I write my z's, I just put a line through it because my z's end up looking like my 2's and I don't want to confuse you. All right, so negative 40 x squared is negative 1 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 5 multiplied by x times x. So let's find the greatest common factor. They each have a negative 1. They each have a 2. We have another 2 and another 2. They each have an x, and that's it. So our greatest common factor, I'm going to multiply this together. Negative 1 times 2 is negative 2. Negative 2 times 2 is negative 4. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. Multiplied by x. So I'm going to factor out my greatest common factor, negative 8x, multiplied by what's left over. Y times z is y z squared, plus, because remember I changed my minus in the middle to plus my negative, so I have plus in the middle. Let's see what's left over for 40x squared. 5 times x is 5x. All right, so let's see if you can factor out the greatest common factor. Here are 3 problems for you to work on, and then I'll go through the answers with you when you're ready. Okay, so the first one, 32. I'm going to break this one down to 2 times 16. 16 is 2 times 8, 2 times 4, and 4 is 2 times 2. 12 gives me 2 times 6, and 6 is 2 times 3. So that means 32 x cubed is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, just making sure I got all of them, multiplied by x times itself 3 times. 12x squared is 2 times 2 times 3, multiplied by x times itself twice. So our greatest common factor, we have a 2 in each, we have another 2, we have an x, and another x. So greatest common factor is 2 times 2 is 4, x times x is x squared. So that means I'm going to factor out 4x squared, and I'm going to be left with, in the first term we're left with 2 times 2, which is 4. 4 times 2 is 8, multiplied by x, plus, which to see what's left in 12x squared. Just a 3. Okay, so that's our answer. All right, the next one. 4 breaks down to 2 times 2. 20 gives me 2 times 10. 10 is 2 times 5. So 4x cubed is 4 times x times x times x. And 20x to the 4th y is 2 times 2 times, sorry, I didn't break down this 4. That was 2 times 2. I factored up here and didn't bring it down. So 20x to the 4th y is 2 times 2 times 5 multiplied by x to the 4th. So x times itself 4 times multiplied by the y. So greatest common factor. They each have a 2. They each have another 2. They each have an x, another x, and another x. So that means our greatest common factor is 2 times 2 is 4 multiplied by x cubed, because x is multiplied by itself 3 times. So I'm going to factor out 4x cubed. See what's left in the parentheses. There's plus in between. All right, so this first one I have nothing left. But that doesn't mean I can put a 0. I can't leave it blank. Because if I re-multiply, I have to say 4x cubed times what would give me 4x cubed? Well, times 1. So I have to put 1 in there. Because if I factored something out, basically divided by 4x cubed divided by 4x cubed is 1. You have to have it there. Okay, in my 20x to the 4th y, I'm left with 5 times x times y, so 5xy. And the last one, we have negative 18. I'm going to break this one down to negative 1 times 18. 18 is 2 times 9, and 9 is 3 times 3. Okay, just like before, when I have minus, I'm going to change it to plus negative 48. So I can factor out negative 1 times 48. 48 is 2 times 24. 24 is 2 times 12. 12 is 2 times 6. 6 is 2 times 3. So find the greatest common factor. Negative 18. X squared y cubed is negative 1 times 2 times 3 times 3. Negative 48 xy equals negative 1 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 3. Double check that I got them all in there. Multiplied times x times y. Oh, up here I forgot my variables. Multiplied by x squared is x times x. Y cubed is y times y times y. All right, getting in a hurry. All right, negative 1 is multiplied in each. 2 is multiplied in each. We have a 3, we have an x in both, and a y. So, greatest common factor. Negative 1 times 2 is negative 2. Negative 2 times 3 is negative 6, and we have an x times a y. So I'm going to factor out negative 6 xy. Our first term, we're left with 3 times y, which is 3y squared, plus, because we changed that negative to factor out, we changed that minus to a negative, plus a negative. Second term, we're left with 2 times 2, which is 4. 4 times 2 is 8, and no variables. So that is your answer.